This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 74. Welcome to the 74th episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you'll know that one of the topics that we talk about a lot on the show is transitioning from the pill or other hormonal contraceptives and improving your menstrual cycle health along the way. So I decided to create an awesome resource that tackles exactly that, and it's free when you sign up for the Fertility Friday newsletter. So make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/ebook to get your free copy of my new ebook, Where the Is My Period? 5 ways to restore your menstrual cycle health and fertility after going off the pill, where I reveal what to expect when coming off of hormonal contraceptives, and I share 5 steps to restoring healthy menstrual cycles post-pill. And if you've been enjoying the show, I would love it if you take a moment to leave a review and a rating in iTunes. It helps the show to move up in rankings so that more people can find it. And I would like to say a special thank you to all the listeners who've left reviews already. I do read all of your reviews, and I really appreciate you taking the time to let me know how I'm doing. And in today's show, I'm very excited to welcome my guest, Sheridan Voysey. Sheridan is a writer, speaker, and broadcaster on faith and spirituality from Oxford, UK, who has written several books, including Resurrection Year, Turning Broken Dreams into New Beginnings, which we'll be talking about quite a bit today. He spent 18 years in radio and has been featured in numerous TV and radio shows. He also speaks at numerous conferences and events internationally. And in today's show, as I mentioned, we'll be talking about his book, Resurrection Year, which actually chronicles the 10-year fertility journey that he and his wife went through. I'm so excited to have him here today to share his powerful story and to talk about his experience. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Sheridan.
It's great to talk to you, Lisa.
Well, thanks for coming on. So I had contacted you last year after hearing an interview that you did, and I would just love for you to talk a little bit about your experience. And I guess we could start by talking about, what inspired you to write the book Resurrection Year, and I guess that'll lead us into your experience.
Yeah. The idea of writing Resurrection Year never ever crossed my mind. It was actually a writer friend named Adrian Plass who, after hearing our story one night, when at the time we were talking about my struggling writing career because we'd moved from Australia over here to the UK, and publishers didn't want to talk to me anymore because I had this, big platform over in Australia with a national radio show and speaking engagements and book contracts and things. And I came over here to the UK, didn't have that. And just out of the blue, this one particular night, Adrian said to me, "Have you thought about writing your story into a book?" And I said, "What do you mean, like a memoir?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "No, I don't want to do that at all," because this was different territory for me and for my writing and speaking, and I didn't want to be known as the infertility guy, Lisa. I really didn't. So no, the idea of Resurrection Year was not my idea one bit. It came serendipitously from a friend, and gosh, 3 years later, every single week still, I'm getting responses from readers that are telling me how the book has changed their life. So Adrian was right on the money.
Wow. And so maybe tell the listeners who have maybe not heard of you, maybe not read your book, and maybe aren't familiar with the experience that you went through. Maybe you could take us through the experience that you and your wife actually went through with fertility.
Yeah. Okay. So it begins in the year 2000 when Merrin walks into the room and says to me, "Honey, I think it's time." And I, like a typical male, said, "Time for what?" And she said, "Time to start a family." And she was absolutely right. We'd been married 5 years by that stage. We were in a settled situation. We'd been moving around from kind of city to city before then, but we were in a settled state. And it was time. And like any couple from that moment on, every 28 days, you're looking for signs of success, right? Mm-hmm. And for us, we experienced that cycle of what everyone listening to this podcast right now knows about, that monthly experience of expectation followed by disappointment. And that rhythm of up and then down, high and then low, maybe this is the month, no, it's not. That just lasted for month after month after month for us. And after 9 months, we went and got some tests done. The tests revealed that there was a problem on my side. I had very, very low sperm count and very, very low motility for the sperm I did have. And that began what ultimately turned out to be a 10-year journey for us trying to fall pregnant. And over that 10 years, we tried everything from IVF to waiting for 2 years on the Australian adoption list. We tried special diets. We tried special supplements. We're committed Christians. We tried healing prayer. We tried pretty much everything that we felt okay doing. And I guess to take a long story short, I mean, this is the whole of the first chapter of Resurrection here that we're racing through here. But on Christmas of 2010, it was December of 2010, we got a phone call from the IVF clinic, and we never ever thought we'd hear the news, but they said it's all looking good. And I remember Merrin saying, what do you mean by good? I mean, define the word good. I mean, are we talking about good? Or are we talking about really good? And the nurse said, all your hormone levels are exactly where we'd expect them to be for a pregnancy. And from that moment on, Lisa, there was jubilation in the Voysey household. I mean, my mum squealed with delight, and my father gave his special Voysey victory laugh. I call it the Voysey victory laugh. The prayed for, blessed, waited for child was finally arriving. And then on Christmas Eve of 2010, we got another phone call from the same nurse, and she said, "We're so sorry, but we got it wrong." And with that, Merrin put the phone down. She walked into our bedroom. She curled up in a fetal position on our bed, and that's where the dream of a child ended. And so we decided from that point on that was it. We'd given it 10 years, and our lives had pretty much been on hold during that time. And we decided, okay, we're going to draw the line in the sand. We're going to move over that. We're going to move on. We're not going back to adoption or IVF or anything like that. We are going to bring this dream to an end, and we are going to move on to our lives. And that's what we did.
Well, I was even getting kind of chills as you were talking. It must be really interesting for you to have to kind of talk about this story, not have to, but in the work that you do and the speaking that you do. I'm sure this is one of the topics that you talk about fairly often. So it must be interesting for you to actually talk about this. And it struck me as you were taking us through your story that, that probably took us a few minutes to go through, but we're talking about a 10-year period of time. Mm-hmm. So for what it's worth, I mean, reading your book or hearing you talk, we're not even going to begin to understand what it was like to go through that cycle for 10 full years.
Yeah, and we had times during that 10 years where, we might have a year or so where we kind of thought, well, maybe this isn't going to happen. Let's just be a childless couple. But then, of course, that maternal-paternal drive kicks back in again. And, we were then thinking about, well, let's try something new. Maybe we'll try IVF again, or maybe we'll do this supplement or this diet or whatever it might be. So throughout that 10 years, there were kind of times where it was intense, and then we'd ease back, and then we go back to it, and then we were kind of in an indecisive mode most of the time, I think. And it was only really at the end of those 10 years that we made that decision. I can't even begin to express the emotions of that 10 years, and in particular that December month of 2010. It was just the worst moment of our lives. I mean, I really can't put it any other way apart from that. It was the worst moment of our lives. And, you talk about me being able to speak about it and share it very often now from a stage, which I do. And, the reason why I can is simply because there's such a sense of relief now. We went through that. We moved on. And I can speak about it now because we have actually done the hard work of walking through the journey as much as we could, then deciding that we weren't going to go any further with the journey, going through a grieving process, and now being able to recycle something out of it that is turning out to be helpful for other people. And not just people who are wrestling with infertility, but people that are wrestling with all kinds of broken dreams, whether it be singleness and they want to be married, or whether it be a career dream that hasn't been fulfilled, or they did have the dream career and they lost it, or something like that. So, I mean, that's the only reason I think I am able to speak it and share it kind of time after time is because of the good that's coming out of it and also because of the relief that has come from just, I guess, moving on with our lives.
Mm-hmm. Well, and maybe you could talk a little bit, I mean, just about, because as a woman, who has always known I've wanted children,
Yeah.
and I'm guessing your wife was the same way, right? When you know, you know.
Yeah.
So,
And you always expect that's for most of us, we expect that's the way our life is going to move.
well, absolutely. And so then the question I have, how is it even possible to let that go?
Yeah. It's a very, very good question. And I get it a lot from people when I, do a seminar or something, and there'll be a question and answer afterwards, and they'll say, "Can you really move on? Like, really, can you?" And the answer is yes, but the answer is it's not going to be easy, but you can. And so, Marin, if she was here right now, she'd be able to tell you the same thing. It's not easy. I guess the way I'd put it is like this: we have a scar as a result of us not being able to get what we really, really wanted. And that scar is the result of a wound, and the wound has healed now. But every now and then, somebody will bump into us, if you like, and we'll be reminded, oh, that's right, we've got a scar there and it hurts. And so, yes, there are still times when we were reminded of what we don't have. Going to a wedding, for instance, and seeing a father walk his daughter down the aisle, and I think I'm not going to have that. Or, walking through a playground or something like that. But the time between the tears gets longer. And there was a time where, Marin in particular, she was crying every week. And then it got down to every month. And then it got down to every 3 months. And then it got longer. And so I think we realized just the other day, it's probably been a good 2-3 years since Marin's had a bit of a cry about this. We've been able to grieve and then move on. But that grieving process was really, really important. And also we've been able to find some other things that have come out of it. And we can also be, I guess, uncles and aunts, and we can have an influence in our friends' children. And the great thing is I can wind them up and I can stir them up and I can have all sorts of fun with them, and I can leave them there at the end of the night and we can go home and we can sleep nicely all night.
Yes, definitely perks. But for the listeners, I mean, some of my listeners might be thinking, well, why would I want to have you on the show, right? Because part of what the interviews that I do on the show, and I love exploring all different facets of the topic of fertility. But, a lot of what we hear, just like what you said at the beginning of the story, when you said, you tried everything. Like I throughout all of the episodes that I've done, I provide like a laundry list of all these different things that you can try to potentially improve your fertility and your health and everything. But I feel that there also has to be a place in the discussion for when things don't go the way you wanted, or when things just, for whatever reason, don't pan out. Not because you want to stop trying, but because it's life, and you just never know what's going to happen. And so one of the things I wanted to talk about as well, obviously you and your wife are still married. Yes. And everybody who goes through fertility struggles as significant as yours aren't necessarily married at the end of it.
Yeah.
So maybe you could talk a little bit about how this impacted your relationship and how you were able to actually stay together.
Yeah, that's a great question. And Lisa, it is so good that actually you're having this conversation, about what happens if, you don't get the child at the end of the journey. Most couples do in some way. I mean, all the friends that we have who had also gone through infertility as we were, they all have children. We were the only couple that didn't get the child. And that can be very difficult at times, but also it's life. And so the fact is that, yes, I think it's just so responsible of you to do this kind of conversation on this podcast. So well done, because actually it would have been helpful for us to have heard a conversation like this when we were going through I call it our decade of decade in the wilderness. When it comes to the marriage issue, that was a really, really important one for us. I think it's illustrated very well by a conversation that we had with a counselor in the IVF clinic. And we got together with the counselor, and she said, now, you know that the process of going through IVF can put a lot of strain on a marriage. And initially, Maren and I thought that she was talking about the effect of the drugs, and what they actually do to, create and release all of the eggs. And then, of course, there's almost this kind of artificial menopause afterwards, and the highs and the lows of the emotions and everything that happens with the drugs. And she said, well, I'm not actually talking about the drugs. I'm actually talking about the decision-making processes you have to go through. And when you are not maybe on the same page, and one of you wants to do another round of IVF and the other one of you doesn't want to do that. Now, I'm glad we talked it through, because Maren and I were in that situation many, many times. In fact, I would have given up the journey on having a child a lot earlier than Maren would. I just wanted to move on from it. But Maren really wanted to keep on going. And we had many, many hours sitting on that couch having long conversations and wrestling with decisions. And Maren said to the counselor, we've already decided that our marriage is more important than having a child. And, with that, the counselor actually, literally, she slumped in her chair and she said, I'm so glad to hear you say that, because just yesterday, a couple sat in the very same chairs that you're sitting in now, and the wife said in front of the husband to me, if this doesn't work, if IVF doesn't work and we don't get the child, our marriage is over. Wow. And so I think what I tell people, and what Maren and I kind of share with couples, is please put your relationship first. Because if you don't get the child and then you don't have the marriage at the end of it, well, then you've got a double loss. But if you get through this, if you walk through this wilderness together with all the tough decisions you've got to make, and the times when you're on the different pages and you want different things, and if you can negotiate that and work it through, you can actually have an incredibly strong marriage. In fact, a number of the couples that we talk with regularly, for whom all the options of trying to start a family have not worked, they have been able to go on and have a really strong marriage. It's one of the great blessings, actually, of not being able to have children, is you can really have time for each other. So please, 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 if you're walking through that wilderness now, please make that commitment to each other. The marriage is more important than having the children. That way you don't miss out twice.
Mm-hmm. That's really powerful. And, I've heard, I don't remember exactly where I heard it, but the difference between the way men and women deal with infertility struggles. And I remember exactly what you talked about, that the counselor brought up, of not being on the same page. And it was kind of, the woman is focused on having the baby, and that's it. Yep. And the man is focused on his woman. And he's seeing how difficult it is for her, and seeing basically like this shattered version of his wife. I remember hearing that. And so then, what this counselor was saying was, it's usually the man that's willing to actually kind of give up sooner, because he just so concerned. He just wants his wife back. And then the woman takes that to be like, you're not being supportive. Is that something that you can relate to? Is that something that was that an aspect of it looking back?
No, I think that really does clarify it very, very well. There's no doubt that I think probably even the majority of the pain for me was watching Maren go through that monthly torture of the expectation followed by the disappointment. And, there's only so many times that you can hold your sobbing wife each night before you just want to get out of this at all costs. So I think there's a lot of insight in what you've just talked about there. That process was definitely at work for us. I think that was the worst pain for me. Yes, I really would have liked to have a daughter, and I don't get to have that. But the greater pain was watching Maren go through that. It was just horrendous. And so, yeah, I did want to end that, soon. I was also probably not quite as driven to have children as Maren was. We both wanted children, but I wasn't quite as driven as Maren was. And she really, really did, because that's the way she'd always kind of dreamt of her life going. She'd always expected that's the path that her life would follow. And when you see that that's maybe not going to have happen, then there's also the big question of, well, what is my broader life about? What is the very purpose of my existence? If it's not going to be having children, well, then what am I going to do with my life? So it actually brings in again, I guess, another crisis, a very crisis of identity and a sense of purpose, and that has to be walked through as well.
Hmm. Well, and those are some really big, deep questions.
Yeah.
Like, it's not
Yeah.
something you can gloss over. If you've always thought that you would be a parent and then you don't have the opportunity to be a parent, that really struck me what you said of having to figure out your greater purpose and, what am I going to do now?
Yeah.
Was that something that you and your wife worked through kind of on your own together? Although that sounds funny, I kind of meant more on your own, like without outside counsel, or did you actually seek counseling to help you to go through that?
Yeah, we could have really done with some better quality advice as we were going through our wilderness. We really could have. I mean, in the early days, I was really trying to wrestle through the ethics of in vitro fertilization, and again, my faith being very important. I was just trying to work out issues of life and whether the loss of embryos is the loss of life. And I was just trying to wrestle through all those things. And I found it very, very hard to find, clear answers on that. As of course, it always will be difficult, because we're dealing with very, very difficult issues here. It's very hard to work those kinds of answers out with clear black and white, yes or no, binary answers to those questions. But also when it came to that as well, I mean, our faith is really important to us, and that helped us actually probably more so with the sense of purpose and the sense of direction and identity, more so than with some of the questions that I guess arose during the wilderness, like, well, if we follow this God who we believe is to be so good and loves us and answers prayer, well, then why aren't we getting our answers to our prayers in this particular situation? So there was that kind of challenge to our faith. But on the aspect of identity and purpose, it actually really helped, because we believed that first and foremost, we're actually sons and daughters of God, and that identity can never be taken away from us. And when it comes to a sense of purpose, well, then we can actually be called to a task or a series of tasks in life that we have been gifted for and we have talents for, and that we can be positioned in this world to serve other people through. And so that has helped us, I guess, navigate the journey after infertility. And particularly for Merrin, she did have to really wrestle that through. Who am I now? What is my life going to be about? How will I invest my life? Because I've only got a few years on this earth. And she then basically discovered, she did, Lisa, what all of us deeply really dream of doing, but just do not have the courage to do. She went and studied statistics.
Oh, that's always been a dream of mine. Not.
Exactly. That's right. So as soon as people find out that she's a medical statistician, she works in the area of medical research, they kind of start backing away when they meet her at a party. They say, oh, I was terrible at maths at school. And then when we say, oh, well, actually it means that she's in medical research, then they start moving forward again. They say, oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. You're saving the world. You're doing wonderful things. So
Well, that's really neat. Well, I know you had mentioned at the very top of the show that when a friend of yours suggested to write the book, you didn't want to be the infertility guy. You didn't want this, situation to define you. But maybe you could talk about, you mentioned as well that ever since you wrote the book and you've shared your story, that people have been reaching out to you, people like me, because I found your story just to be so profound, and you're so honest, right, with it, and open about it. And just to be able to share that, because your story and this side of the fertility journey is virtually nowhere. I mean, people are not talking about this. It's the American movie scenario, right? Well, there's always a happy ending. So we always assume that there's going to be a baby at the end of this. Yeah. So maybe you could talk about some of the unexpected things that have come out of you sharing your story, and the different ways that you've actually been able to help people who are struggling with infertility as well.
Yeah, that aspect of vulnerability and honesty that you mentioned there has been probably the most consistent feedback that we've had from readers of Resurrection Year. And they've all said, thank you for being so honest, to the point where at one stage, Marin and I kind of sat down and said, have we been too honest? I mean, we keep on getting it from so many different directions. Have we shared too much of our lives? I mean, even some family members said, wow, I mean, this is very, very honest. This is very raw. Maybe it's a bit too raw. But actually, it's been the thing that has been the thing that most people have been helped by. We are so trained and are so shaped by the Disney dream that we just do not know how to cope when the Prince Charming doesn't arrive at the end and sweep us off our feet, or when the happy ending comes, and when everything is tied up neatly with a bow and we get our gift. We just don't know how to live. But actually, the world is not like a Disney ending. It just isn't. And so some of the greatest, service that we can offer people is actually to offer both honesty and vulnerability with the difficulties of a journey like this, but also to offer hope. It's got to be both together. One or the other isn't really going to work. It's got to be both. And that's what I tried to put into Resurrection Year. And the other thing, Elisa, the other kind of most common aspect of feedback from readers from the book is they'll say something along the lines of, and they'll say it in different words, and they'll often be very, very apologetic, but they'll say, look, I'm really sorry to say this, and I hope you take it the right way, but I'm really glad you don't get the baby at the end of the book. Because again, they're looking for the typical Hollywood ending, and they're expecting it and they're almost dreading it, because they've gone through this journey and they've read all the books that ultimately get you to the goal. And that might be a miraculous event at the end where the couple gets a child, or they get an adopted child or something, and everybody lives happily ever after. And so far that hasn't happened for them. And funny enough, it's actually a great comfort that there is somebody else out there for whom it hasn't worked, but who has been able to get on with their lives. I could tell you, oh my goodness, I mean, just story after story. Think about a lady who heard me on a radio station being interviewed. She was driving along. She then drove to her nearest bookstore as she was listening to the interview. She sat listening to the rest of the interview in the car park. As soon as it was over, she went in, she got a copy of Resurrection Year, and she said, for the first time, I think maybe my life could be worth something again, when I thought all the dreams were gone and my life was over. I'll stay awake all night to talk to those kinds of people and to help those kinds of people through their particular crisis. For other people, and it hasn't always been females, it's often been males as well. So I think of a guy who, in the space of a few weeks, lost his job, lost his marriage, now has a very awkward situation with trying to have access to his children. And he read Resurrection Year and found that it gave him hope to be able to start again and to not feel like this is the end. I don't have the happy ending, but I can still start again. I can still get through this. I've spoken at many conferences and many seminars, and I guess it's a similar kind of feedback that we get from people who just say, okay, now I can believe that I can get through this. I can actually go. Before I thought, if I don't have the child, my life is over. Now I know it's not. I can move on.
Were you surprised at how many people reached out to you expressing that they too didn't get the baby? Like, were you surprised at how many people, or, did you feel that you were the only one? This type of experience, I can only imagine how isolating it can be. So were you surprised to find that there were, many other couples that had the same, not same, but you know what I mean? Like, that hadn't had the happy ending?
We often hear from couples when they're still going through the wilderness journey. Mm-hmm. They actually haven't really come to the end point of drawing a line and then moving on. And so it's still a rare experience to come across a couple who are completely and utterly childless and are kind of going well in that. They're content in that. They're moving ahead. So it is actually quite a rare experience. But what we do find is quite a lot of resonance with our single friends because actually they experienced something similar. They wanted maybe children, but maybe in some cases they haven't got the husband or the wife, And so we resonate a lot with them because we've both had a broken dream and it's just been slightly different or kind of related. I think what has been interesting is the amount of men who have very, very quietly and privately taken me aside when I'm speaking at a conference or something, and they'll find it very difficult to kind of rock on up and then start talking about their emotions, about not being able to be dads. But when there's a moment and, maybe they'll bump into me in the men's room or something, and then they'll start sharing, or they'll take me around the corner where nobody else can see. One guy said to me, how did this not affect your sense of masculinity? And it was a very, very good question. And one that I've had over and over again from men in a very quiet, private way. It might be through emails or something like that, because it is a real challenge to masculinity. And I think there's a variety of reasons for that, for our culture that, kind of emphasizes so many aspects of what the big, brawny male is supposed to be about. And when I talk our culture, I'm talking about Canadian culture, American culture, my culture, Australia, or even British culture. Well, it's a little bit more kind of relaxed here. But Western culture and the ideal male, the ideal man, has got a good job and he's able to look after his family well and provide, and he can sire a child. And so that has been a big thing. And I think it's, I'm assuming that probably the majority of your listeners would probably be females. But it would be really well worth keeping in mind that a whole bunch of men really, really wrestle with that question of, well, who am I and what kind of man am I if I can't sire a child? They may never say it out loud, but it really is there.
Mm-hmm. I think that's such an important piece because we're just fed so much garbage about what men should be like and what women should be like. And there's all these stereotypes. And so I think you've caught us all who are listening to this podcast and me as well in the stereotype, really, that it's just women who want children. You just don't even think about the single men out there who always wanted a family and just never had the opportunity.
Yep. Again, because they'll get on with their lives and, they'll try and look as successful as they possibly can be. And you don't want to fall into stereotypes, but, some aspects of stereotypes, there is some truth to them, of course. That's why they're there. Generalities are there because there is some general truth to them. And, some guys are very goal-oriented, task-oriented. They'll throw their whole lives back into their careers, all of that, and that will happen. But inside, there's some other stuff going on there. And I hear from those guys, and in particular that aspect of, I could never tell my mates down the pub about this. I could never have a conversation with my football buddies about this. This is just not something we talk about. For a start, it's just too emotional. And secondly, I just don't know how I'd be able to recover my sense of manhood, but my sense of respect. How could I get them to respect me after, admitting something like this?
Yeah, see, it's just so, I don't know. I find it to just be so, I think as a woman, I feel like it would be hard to be a man because then where are your outlets to express that vulnerability, right?
Yeah.
And it's amazing that your book has opened the door for men to quietly ponder that and to know that that's okay and to see another man who has had to ponder that.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that's something you wouldn't necessarily think of, but it's such an important conversation. One of the topics I wanted to ask you about as well, we've touched on it, but your experience with adoption, I think because, that is something then it's always kind of in the back pocket, right? If I can't get pregnant naturally, I can do IUI, IVF, etc. If that doesn't work, I can always adopt. So maybe you could take us through your experience with adoption and, what happened, why it didn't kind of fall the way that you were hoping it did.
Yes. So the caveat to all of this is that we went through the Australian system with adoption, and it's different, very different in America. I don't know what it's quite like in Canada, and it's kind of similar in the UK, although there's some kind of minor differences. But in the Australian system, by law, you really don't know where you're at with the process. You go into a pool of waiting couples, um, and you're not in a queue. So it's not like, well, our turn is going to come very soon, and we're going to be allocated a child because we're number 10 on the list, and soon we'll be number 9, then number 8, number 7. We'll finally get our chance. And so the way the Australian system works is you go through about 8 to 9 months of assessment where you have all the conversations with the social worker. They work out whether you're, a suitable person to look after somebody else's biological child. And then you write up a profile. The profile then goes to the Department of Community Services, and then a birth mother chooses adoptive parents based on that profile. Now, you can wait for a while and never really know where you're at. So to this very day, we don't know why after the 8, 9 months that we went through with the assessment period, and then waiting for almost 2 years after that to get that phone call to say, come and collect your child, we to this day do not know why the phone never rang. Was it something in the profile that birth mothers were passing over because they didn't like something that they read in the profile? Was it just simply because there were a very small number of children available for adoption that year through our state of New South Wales at the time? It could well have been that. A smaller and smaller number of children are actually available for legal adoption these days. The other option that's available in Australia, and I know in other countries as well, is some sort of kind of midway between fostering and adoption. So these are children that it's almost certain that they're not going to go back to their biological parents for whatever reason because of the family situation. But the legal aspects of the child actually being put up for adoption by the birth mother, birth father, has not gone through. And so there's kind of this midway one. We were kind of waiting on that as well. We looked at fostering, and I particularly found that I just didn't think I was going to be built for being a foster parent. If we already had children and already knew about what parenting was about and how to parent a child, then I think maybe I would have felt more confident to be a foster parent. But the fact is that in all of the countries of the majority of people who will be listening to this podcast, there is a great need for foster carers. And I would really commend that to people if you feel like you're built for that. I wish I was going through the training for it. I felt that I wasn't. And so we didn't go through that particular path. But that can be a path that leads ultimately into adoption maybe later on down the track in the legal sense. So look, Lisa, I don't know. I really don't know. And that was part of the problem, is that in every part of this journey for us was filled with mystery. We didn't know why the IVF didn't work. We knew technically that the quality of the embryos wasn't very good that was produced, but we didn't know why. We didn't know why I had low sperm count. We didn't know why we never got the phone call to come and pick up our adoptive child. We never knew, and we never will. And that is one of the challenges, of course, with walking through this wilderness journey for any couple.
Mm-hmm. Well, it just sounds like there's just all these questions, and I understand why you use the metaphor of being in the wilderness, because you don't know where you're going, you don't know why you're here. How did I get here? Why am I on this path? And why am I not getting to where I'm trying to go? So during this time, I'm sure that your friends, your family, and everything saw you struggle. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what that was like, kind of managing the friends and the family and the well-meaning comments and the suggestions, and what was that like?
That's a great question, because you do have to navigate all of those different relationships and the well-meaning comments that just aren't helpful, and of course the expectations of parents as well. I mean, they're invested in this too, more than probably what I realized. They're waiting to become grandparents in many cases. They're waiting to be able to hold their own grandchild. So they're emotionally invested in this whole process as well. Where do I begin? I mean, with friends, we had a really good run. In when I hear about the horror stories of other couples who hear all sorts of terrible things said to them when it comes to not being able to have children, uh, maybe the classic one of just relax, go on a holiday. It'll come when the time is right. All of those kinds of things that we all kind of use basically because we're awkward and we don't know really what to say, and so we just kind of throw something in there. Or we talk about how I really wish we didn't have any kids because Mike and I just want to get on with our lives and we've still got them hanging around. All of those kinds of things that people say to try and make you feel better, but actually you wish they didn't say at all. We had a pretty good run. What was really interesting for us was we had to give our friends a lot of grace because there were times where they said the right things at the wrong moment, and no matter what they said or did, it just wouldn't have been right for us anyway. So we were part of a little group that met on Friday nights, and it was a church group, part of our church, and we got together to talk and to pray and to do all sorts of things together. I have never been in a better group than that. There was only about maybe 8 or 9 of us, and we were close, and we were in each other's lives to a wonderful, wonderful level. And even that group, in the end, Merrin said, I can't go to it anymore. Because even just having people inquire every week, how did you go this week? Any news? What's the update? Can we pray for you about this again? They did everything right. And yet it was still so difficult to be confronted with that every single week. So Merrin said, I just don't think I can go to that group for whatever period of time. Now, the wonderful thing is that those friends understood and they said, absolutely fine. You don't come for it as long as you don't want to. We're not going to put any pressure on you. You just let us know how we can serve you best and how we can be there for you. So we had a great group of friends who still could not get it right every single time. And we just had to release that and give them grace in that. When it came to parents, when we were going through adoption, you have to kind of manage things with the adoption process too, because as we were being taught through the preparation process of adoption, there are certain things that it's good for the wider family to know about. Things like it's better to talk about adoption not as this is my adopted child, but rather we are adoptive parents, so that the child doesn't have this sense of identity of I'm always the one who was on the outer and I've received some degree of charity from somebody. The adoption isn't the chief identity of the child. It's actually something that defines the parents. Trying to kind of communicate things like that to parents, for instance. Our parents were wonderful, but it was a lot for them to take in too, because to some degree they almost felt, well, are we going to have to pass some sort of exam before we can look after this grandchild of ours when you adopt them? No, we have to cross every T and dot every I and make sure we're saying all the perfect things. It was a lot of work for them as well. So that was something that we had to navigate. And then when it came to other people that you just meet in the street or you meet through your work or whatever, I mean, the question often comes to us, do you have kids? Now, we always say, no, we don't have kids. We don't lie. We don't go into it. But I'm really choosy even now as to who I go into the details with, because the amount of, 2 nights ago, we were at a party. Somebody said to Merrin, do you have kids? And she said, no, actually, we don't. And he said, oh, well, we're all in the right time, And then she said, well, actually, we started trying to have kids and we weren't able to. Oh, well, the fact is that it can happen anytime. You just never know what could happen. It could be a miracle come around. And Merrin thought, I'm just not going to get into this. She just kind of nodded and then tried to change the conversation when it was time. Those kinds of conversations, you just got to pick your battles. When will I go into detail? When will I just not say anything? And most of the time I just say, no, we don't actually have kids. What about you? Do you have kids? And move the conversation on.
Mm-hmm. Well, and for anyone listening who, has a friend who's struggling with infertility, or, family member, and they feel kind of awkward because they're not sure how to navigate it. I might have told this story before on the podcast, but I have there's a friend of mine that I work with, and she just had her fourth child, and it's that kind of like haha TV, like my husband just has to look at me like, you know what I mean? Like,
Oh, yes.
they were
Yeah.
barely even intimate, and they just one time, and I'm trying to say, right? They're
Yeah,
they're that
yeah.
couple.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so for her, she was telling me about her friend who was struggling and how challenging it was. She was like beside herself. She's like, I don't even want to tell her I'm pregnant again because, the last time I got pregnant, right? So everyone's just trying to manage and be supportive and understanding in their own ways. But
That's a very good thing you've raised there, because that is a real difficulty. My wife had a very close friend that they were meeting up every week for coffee, and then later on she found out that this friend was now 4 months pregnant, and they had shared so deeply of their lives. And then suddenly Maren discovers there's been this most important thing in this friend's life that she hasn't shared. And it felt like an absolute betrayal. And the reason why, of course, is the friend felt guilty, actually, for being pregnant with child number 2 or number 3, whatever it was at that stage. And she didn't know how to break the news. So it is an awkward thing. I've had male friends who have gone on and on and on about how wonderful it is to be a father, and how wonderful it is to watch their children grow up, and how wonderful it is to see them caring for each other, and on and on. And sometimes I just sit, do you not remember the situation I'm in, man? Do you not remember? So it is a very awkward situation, and the only word I can use is grace. Is that we have to have honest conversations with our friends that, look, this is not the kind of conversation I really can handle right now, and also recognize they're just never going to get it right. And so sometimes we just got to forgive them and just try and keep the friendship as much as we can, because they're never going to get it right.
I think that's such a good point, because I've asked this type of question in a number of shows that I've done kind of around fertility struggles and things like that. And yeah, I feel like the commonality there is that people are always going to say awkward things, because we're human beings. We are awkward, and we're kind of weird, and we don't know how to handle certain situations that make us uncomfortable. And I think we've all been in that situation.
Yeah, especially here in the UK, Lisa. I mean, people over here are awkward. It's a national character trait. I can tell you that now.
Yeah. So I think the piece that you bring to it about being forgiving, and kind of remembering that friendship, right? Your friends,
Yes.
provided you have good friends that have your best interests at heart.
Well, that's right. And unfortunately, there are some friendships that just, they do have to take a second or third priority because the other person doesn't get it, and they're just not sensitive. And for your own well-being, actually, what you need to do is invest that time into other friendships in the meantime, until you can both get through this, until you're strong enough to be able to deal with them again.
Mm-hmm. Well, and even what you mentioned about the group, and I think that was amazing that you had the group. So because help you not feel so isolated, to actually talk to people who get it. And that applies not just for infertility, it applies for everything. It applies to new moms when you want to talk to other people that are going through the same thing as you. But one of the things you mentioned was that when you and Maren needed that space, not to be kind of in it every week, they understood that.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the challenge as well, because then sometimes your friends will take a break from you if you're the one that has 4 kids, and you have to kind of navigate that the best you can and remember that it's not necessarily about you.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. And the other, just coming to mind, another story now as we were going through our journey was later on we had through a kind of third party that there was a couple that we knew who wanted to have us over for dinner, but they never invited us over for dinner because they actually thought that we would be sad, jealous, whatever, of their 3 children. And you know what? Maren and I would have loved to be invited over for dinner. Sometimes friends can be so sensitive in trying to trying to manage our emotions for us so much because they are trying to care that they kind of go the other way. Ultimately, what we really need is that unconditional friendship, don't we? In these kinds of situations, and that includes meals over, and that includes coffee shop conversations, and that includes people like that group who would give us space when we needed space, but not a break in relationship. Either a break in relationship caused through insensitivity, when the people just do not get that them going on about their children is hard for somebody else to hear, or, of course, a break in relationship because the people actually are trying to protect us and so they don't have us round for dinner. So that's what we just desperately need in this situation. We just need unconditional friendship that can, help us walk through the wilderness.
Yeah, I think that just gives so much insight. So I'm really glad that we talked about that because I feel like it's an area that's really difficult for people to manage. And as we kind of move towards the end of the interview, one of the things I wanted to ask you, so your book is called Resurrection Year. So we've talked about your story and we've talked about, all the different aspects of kind of getting through that. So, maybe you could talk about what is a resurrection year and, why did you title your book Resurrection Year?
Yeah. So when we made that decision that this is the final embryo, whatever happens from this point on, we're moving on with our lives, either with a child or without a child, and then it turned out to be without a child, we then wanted to work out what to do. And actually, it turned out to be the same friend, Adrian Plass, who suggested writing the book in the first place. Must be about 6 or 8 months before he suggested the book. We were doing an interview. I was hosting my radio show. Adrian Plass is a very well-known author here in the UK, and we were doing an interview, and it was off air that I started to share a bit about our own story with Adrian because he's a very caring fellow. When he asks you, how are you, he actually means it. And so I just started to tell him some of our story, and he came out with the phrase. He said, in the Christian view of things, new life follows the death of something, just like the Easter story of Jesus coming back to life after his death. And he said, after listening to what you two have gone through, it sounds like you could really do with a resurrection year. And it just stuck with me. And I went home and I mentioned the phrase to Merrin, and she burst out into tears. And she said, that's exactly what I want. I want a year of new life. I want a year of starting again. So when we got that phone call on Christmas Eve of 2010, the plans of what this new year might look like started to kind of go into place. And it was a couple of days later on New Year's Day of 2011 that we started thinking about, well, what will a resurrection year look like for us? And so we started to brainstorm some ideas, and we were still in the grieving process, of course, so that took a little while to work through. But what it worked out for us was for Merrin to have a consolation prize. She had only really had the one dream in her life, which was to be a mum, but she had this kind of secondary dream, and that had been that she'd always wanted to live and work overseas. And it was like, well, now is the time for you to have your consolation prize, your secondary dream. And that's when we started looking at moving overseas. And long story short, she got offered a job at Oxford University, no less. Mm-hmm. And from that point on, we knew where we were heading. We moved over to the UK, and our resurrection year, in terms of a calendar year, actually began the moment we got on the plane and left Australia. And that meant really we had kind of 12 months of just doing a number of things, taking it easy, like resting up, doing some things we normally wouldn't do. And so on our way over here to the UK, we had some time doing some holidaying in Italy and in Switzerland. We came over here, started our lives again. We didn't take on a lot of responsibility and other kind of things, other projects and church and things like that. And we just kind of started again. We had time to do the things that we really kind of needed to do to be able to restore our lives. So I often tell people that it really comes down to about 4 different R's. A resurrection year will have a sense of rest about it. So you'll actually take some time off to rest and recuperate. There will be a sense of recreation about it. I mean, the actual literal meaning of the word recreation is to recreate. So what are the things in your life that help you to kind of come alive again, to recreate you? It might be a hobby, a sport, Maybe it's writing a book that you've always wanted to do, or maybe it's taking up the guitar, or it's doing artwork or something like that. The third R would be renewal. Those questions of identity that we talked about a little while ago, they have to come up into this and the sense of meaning and purpose to my life. And so there's got to be a sense of spiritual renewal. What is my life about? And how do I find some of these answers? And then the fourth one is kind of reinvention. Actually, you can't be the person that you want to be, but you can become somebody else. And there can be a moment in a resurrection year where you can learn, well, this is the new me that I can be. And that can be very liberating, very exciting.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there's when it comes to, like personal development, and there's all these different things. And one of the things I've heard people say is that when things happen to you, and they're usually talking about bad things. So like, for example, if someone has an accident or broken dreams or something that just happens that either you didn't expect or that absolutely was not according to plan. I've heard people say that you have a choice of what it means. Like you get to choose what it actually means for you. And I think that idea is really interesting. If you buy into it, then it means that if something quote unquote bad happens, you get to choose if it's going to ruin your life or if you're going to turn it into something that you could use. Not you could use, but that you could turn it into something meaningful or,
yes,
find something positive in it. Do you think there's some truth to that?
I think the general outlook, there's something to it. I think it can become cruel if taken to a real extreme, because sometimes what happens is people go through a really bad time, go through a terrible broken dream, and then suddenly what's lumped on them is this sense, well, you've got to somehow find a golden lining to this, a silver lining, and you've got to turn the lemon juice into lemonade somehow. And some people are just exhausted and they just don't know where to go. And this is where my Christian faith comes into this, is that I still believe, as much as I have questions for God about how he does and doesn't answer prayer and which one he does answer and which one he doesn't, is that I still believe that there is somebody out there who loves us, who can reach into our lives and can not only set us into a new path, but can do this kind of miraculous work of recycling that horrible manure and turning it into something beautiful can actually spring out of. And that's been our story of the Resurrection Year book and the story that's come out of it. And there's the little film that's been done on it as well, of helping people to start again. Now, I wasn't clever enough to be able to go and say, oh, okay, we've gone through 10 years of wilderness when it comes to infertility. Oh, let's somehow turn it around into something good. I was too exhausted. I was too angry. I was too sad. I wasn't able to do that very quickly at all. But God has been able to do that through our lives, which we really do stand quite amazed at. So, yes, I do. I think there is a choice that each of us have, because I come across a lot of people who are happy to stay in that. Well, not happy about it, but they actually do. They stay in that. They stay stuck in that broken dream for decades. They never move on. So, yes, there is a decision to make at some stage. But I would also just say, hey, there's a greater source of love and power and inspiration out there that is bigger than you. So it just doesn't rest continually only on your own shoulders to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that, what you offer is so much hope, because there's never, like, your mind never goes to, what happens if this doesn't work out. And we don't want to dwell in that either, because you're not going to get very far in life if you always think that everything is going to go, sideways. Like if you don't believe that anything good can happen, if you don't believe your dreams can come true. So, I think it's an important and complex conversation to have, because you don't want to be dwelling on, this is never going to work, because you can't move forward within that space. No. But at the same time, there has to still be just a conversation around it. I think that's why this conversation that we're having is so important. And so before I get into my final questions, I did want to ask you, so, you and your wife were able to quite literally and metaphorically create a fresh start for yourself by actually moving to another country. So for individuals who are listening who may not be able to jump ship, and quite literally make a fresh start in a different place, like new house, new new city, new jobs. What are some ways that what are some ways that we can all kind of create our own resurrection year or incorporate some of those aspects into our own lives without having such a dramatic shift?
Yeah, it's a very important question because I would hate people to walk away going, "Oh, okay, if it doesn't work out, I've somehow got to move countries." Not at all. No, in fact, that can be a really negative thing to do. Sometimes we can be running away from our problems. And in fact, I asked Merrin if she would mind going to counseling about that particular aspect. That's one thing that she needed to do herself. We went to other counseling together as a couple, but I was a little bit concerned that this desire to run and to actually leave Australia and go to another country could be a negative, and maybe it was running away. And you never run away from your problems. You always take them with you. And she actually went to see a counselor for a couple of sessions just to work that through to make sure it was all okay. And it was all okay. She was dealing with the problem properly. And this was just an opportunity for us to pursue a new dream for her. So I think it's really important that you're not running away, whether it be down the street or whether it be different countries. But those 4 R's that I mentioned before, the rest, the recreation, the renewal, and the reinvention, you can do those anywhere. You do not need to go to another country to be able to work those kinds of things through. So you can work through the process of having a resurrection year, finding yourself a new place in life, working out who you are at your deepest level, what the relationships are beyond being a parent. What are the other relationships you have? We have an incredible, dense network of relationships that each of us are in. You know, all of us are children. We might be siblings, brothers and sisters. We are friends. We are colleagues. We actually have a variety of different relationships, which tend to get put on the back burner when we're trying to have a family, because that becomes the only relationship that really, really matters. All of those relationships are really important, and they can be invested in. You have gifts and talents and abilities that they can be invested in as well. It might be that you want to pursue a new hobby at the very smallest thing, or even just a new project. It might be that then you want to explore maybe even just a whole career path change, as Merrin did, although that kind of began earlier than that decision that we had on Christmas Eve of 2010, to just work out where your place is. All of those things can be done right where you are. You don't need to spend lots of money. You don't need to move countries.
Well, that's good to know in case, our listeners can't shift countries quite so easily. So I have a couple of final questions then for today. So the first one is, what would you say is the biggest myth about fertility that you'd like to see corrected?
The biggest myth about fertility. That's a very good question. I'm lost for words, Lisa. You have gone and stumped me for words. I'm not too sure. The biggest myth about, well, maybe that it's only a female thing, that it's only something that women are concerned about. The fact is that it's something that men are concerned about as well. Maybe not in the same kind of way, but they really are. Man, if you talk to my brother, he was so clucky. I'm so glad that he was able to get children, because he really would have been in a crisis if he didn't have children. He just so wanted kids from the earliest of ages. Men also wrestle with this too. So that would be one of the big myths I'd explore.
And what would you say is if there was one myth about infertility from your experience that you feel, well, I guess just one of the biggest myths about infertility that comes to you based on your experience with it?
On infertility?
Mm-hmm.
Biggest myth about infertility? Well, one that I've just been exposed to recently is that if you do move on from this and you are a childless couple, then that's the end. The fact is that I know Merrin and I are going to have to wrestle with our friends becoming grandparents. And so somebody said to us recently that when she went through the whole process, she kind of had to go through the process again when her friends became grandparents and she wasn't able to become a grandparent. So it's not so much a myth really, but it's certainly something for us to keep in mind, is that, we may not be out of the woods completely yet. That there will be a time where maybe we feel this again, and that keeps us sensitive, that keeps us exposed to the needs and the hurts of other people. that keeps us from being very quickly dismissive of the pain that we've now walked past and we've kind of moved on from. No, this could be a journey, and yet, I have to follow it up with the fact it is still not the end of the world. There are still many aspects to our lives that are deep and rich and significant. It's not just this one aspect of your life that is the most important one.
Mm-hmm. Well, and final question of the day. So for, anyone listening who is, struggling to conceive or on their own fertility/infertility journey, what advice, if any, would you have for them?
Find some good friends who really will be able to walk with you through the process. That might be a new friend. It might be a support group of some kind. There is something so profound when you find somebody else who is going through the same thing. There's that wonderful movie that came out a number of years ago called Shadowlands, and it's the story of C.S. Lewis, the great writer. And there's a wonderful line in it where the C.S. Lewis character says, "We read to know we're not alone." And that's what's happened with Resurrection Year. But actually the broader principle is we talk to know that we're not alone. And we converse and we join groups to know that we're not alone. There is, particularly with this journey, which can be just so isolating, is find somebody else who gets it. They may not even have gone through it, but they get it because they're empathetic people. And find those people and journey with them for a little bit, just to have that soul buddy that is alongside you and to walk along with you. I would also say, give yourself a little bit of space. There are times where you just don't know what you want. And as a couple, I would also say give each other space and recognize that often you're at different levels as to the acceptability of this particular path or this choice or the emotional ramifications of the journey so far. There were times where I wanted to jolly Maren up to get her happy again because she was unhappy. And actually that wasn't helpful. I actually had to give her space to be able to walk her emotional journey in the pace that she needed to take it. So giving each other space is really important as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, those are amazing words to end on. Sheridan, I just want to thank you so much for being here today. This is one of the only interviews that I've done that I've actually been on the brink of tears at one part and gotten goosebumps. But that's the point. It's to move us and to share information and stories, and that's how we learn. And I'm really appreciative of your time and just of how generous you were to share of your story. And I'm very thankful, as I'm sure many people are, that you found the courage to write your book and share your experience, because I can only imagine the profound impact that book has had on people's lives.
Yeah, well, thank you, Lisa. And thank you for the hard work that you're doing this. And you're serving a lot of people by doing a podcast like this and exploring topics like this. But it's just so important. If you don't have children, your life is not over. That's just so important for people to get.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. I'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode, so just head over to the show notes page and let me know what you found most helpful or inspiring from today's show. So the show notes page you'll find at fertilityfriday.com/74, so just the number 74. If you have recently started charting your cycles and you're finding it to be way more confusing than you thought it'd be, if you're struggling to understand what the heck is going on with your mucus and your temperature or your cervical position, or even if you've recently come off the pill, your cycles are kind of a mess, and if you're trying to get pregnant and you just want your cycles to be healthy and normal, I can definitely help with that. As a Justice Holistic Reproductive Health Practitioner in training, we can get to the root of the problem together, improve your menstrual cycle health and fertility, and also help you gain confidence in using the fertility awareness method confidently and accurately. So just head over to fertilityfriday.com/coaching and click, or you could just click on the Work With Me button to set up your free 15-minute consultation with me, and we'll go from there. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/fertilityfridays with an S, on Twitter at fertilefriday, and if you enjoyed what you heard today, come and join the community. So just head over to fertilityfriday.com/community, and you'll be redirected to the Fertility Friday Fertility Awareness Facebook group. If you've been enjoying the podcast, please do look for it on iTunes and leave a 5-star review so that more people can find it. And make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com and join my email list. If you have an idea for a podcast episode or a guest suggestion, also you can send me an email at info@fertilityfriday.com. So thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I really appreciate all of you for taking the time to tune into the podcast, whatever you're doing. So whether you're going for a walk or if you're doing housework, laundry, dishes, I always listen to podcasts when I do dishes. But thank you so much for letting me be part of your day. And as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.